Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Q&A, so let's go ahead and knock this out. Alright, first question. Hey Jason, since taking your advice on LISS cardio, I have incorporated into my routine and now I jog for 20 minutes every day. Even on days I lift, provided it's a few hours after and plenty of carbs have been consumed. My question to you is whether or not this is overtaxing on the body. I have not taken a full rest day in months, and the least activity I would undertake is usually a yoga session or a jog session. I also lift and box and have never felt better. Should I keep this going or take a full rest day every week? Thanks, Jason. All right, obviously this poster, he's a regular question asker. He obviously has a boxing background. So he already has a lot of conditioning probably going into strength training. What people need to understand is that work capacity itself is trainable. It's trainable. What would cause you to overtrain at one point will not cause you to reach an overtrained state a year later if you have gradually built up your work capacity. And you guys need to remember that work capacity is absolutely trainable. And even doing LISS cardio once you reach a certain threshold can even help in certain aspects of your recovery without taxing it further. So when you take a person like this who already has a high degree of conditioning going into their strength training, they're not going to always have the same issues that you're going to have when you start adding additional stuff. Now here's what I would say with that. If you're not losing strength and you feel great, you're probably okay. And that's what people need to understand. When you're adapting to new work capacity, you start running into performance problems. You start running into extra fatigue, things like that. Like observe what's going on with my own training, guys. My training was really easy and I progressed hard when I was only doing the relatively low volume of Bulgarian or org mode training or whatever we want to call it now. Right? But as I started adding more volume in and more workload in, it started getting harder because I needed that to push new adaptation. It takes time to adapt to new workloads. But people do need to understand that this whole concept that recovery and work capacity are finite and that you have to do less and less as you get stronger and you're able to generate more work in a unit of time just isn't necessarily true. You build work capacity over time. You'll reach a point later in your life to where you could do, if you were to train long enough to where you could actually do more reps and sets sometimes with 400 pounds on a barbell squatting than you used to be able to do with only 300 pounds and start reaching a fatigue state. And the same with your conditioning work and everything else that you add into your training. You can gradually improve work capacity, but in this case, you say you've never felt better. You're obviously not mentioning anything about strength loss. You're not mentioning any loss of performance. So I think it's fine. I don't see a problem with all. There's no actual need to fully rest from all physical activity. Again, that depends on what you're doing with your training, but there's no actual need to completely do so just to be healthy and fit. It's not required. All right, next question. Could you talk some about your take on the psychological aspects of Bulgarian lite org mode, if you will, training? I run something similar at the moment, Monday through Friday. I've noticed typically perform the worst on Wednesdays and feel the worst on Thursdays. This doesn't entirely match up with the fatigue accumulation and seems psychological to me. Also, what class did you rate as? We need to know for science, as I was always a combat rogue. The psychological aspect is there, but what you also need to understand is there is also a nervous system component also when you are lifting heavy every day. Like notice in my case, I have days where after my heavy deadlifts, my squat actually goes down the next day. So there could be some aspect of that going on, the not just the accumulated muscular fatigue, but the nervous system, and then feeling weaker through that day, your nervous system might be adapting and then strength goes up. But if your performance stays the same and you just feel weaker, you perform bad, but you're still hitting similar weights, just slower, it's probably psychological. It's probably psychological. And the psychological aspect of this absolutely cannot be discounted. This style of training is tough on you psychologically. And every coach who's come in, a lot of people say, oh, that's not true. It's a lazy way to train. And you see other people like coaches like Alec and Curie come in and laugh at that. And they're like, you've clearly never done it. The psychological aspect of it is absolutely enormous on this style of training. It has a psychological aspect to it that can be taxing in and of itself. It can really drain on you if you're not prepared for it. Eventually you do get used to it, But again, that's where certain things like staleness come in, and occasional rotating different exercises, and even as your secondary exercises starts to become real valuable for breaking through those psychological barriers sometimes. What classes did I rate as? Primarily Holy Priest, not counting any little off-spec stuff like tanking a little bit on the side, because that was never main rating for me. I've also done Resto Shaman and Holy Paladin. Although I would say the majority of my rating was as a Holy Priest. I generally like healing more than anything else in raids. I've never found DPS to be particularly fun, as it mostly involved spamming the same buttons over and over and not standing in the fire, and knowing when to stand next to and not stand next to other people. I think Deeps is more boring in raids historically. I liked healing because it was more interactive, and it tends to have a very, very high appreciation from people. Like when you're topping healing meters all the time, raid after raid after raid, you get a lot of bona fides, and people appreciate you a lot. You are seen as unreplaceable in a raiding guild when you're a top healer. Just my experience. All right, next question. Hey Jason, in my Bulgarian, I'm deadlifting every day. I want to figure out what secondary pulls to do and get a lot more variety. I was thinking doing power cleans and snatches twice a week each, and rows off the floor twice. However, I feel like I'm missing a chin-up pull-up. What do you think? Well, brother, you're going to have to pick and choose. You can't always have it all. Look, I mean, if you're going to be doing this style of training, there's a high degree of specificity, and you start talking about adding a secondary pull when you're deadlifting with that frequency, you're going to have to leave something out. Do you absolutely need a chin-up or a pull-up? I mean, I did them for a while instead of rowing, but I'm going to say if you want to be doing the Olympic lifts and rows and everything else, you're going to struggle to really fit a chin up in unless you want to do it one day a week. And I'm going to say if you're doing a chin up and you're doing any sort of Olympic lifts in this system, you probably don't need to row. You could probably toss the rows out completely in that case. You're getting plenty of pulling from the floor. Look, if you're deadlifting almost every day on this system, even lighter deadlifts, and you're doing cleans and snatches multiple times a week, do you really need a row? Like, do you really think you need a row? What, for maybe some extra bicep development? But you could do chins instead. Here's what I would say you could do. If you really want just to get pulls off the floor, why don't you just do cleans and snatches spread out through 5 days, and then do a chin up once a week just to get some extra bicep work? Because you want some sort of pull like that, and you don't want to have to pull from the floor on 2 different lifts every day. That's something you could do also. But you know, you're going to have to weigh all of that out. There's a balancing act to be had there with all of it. You're going to have to find your own balance there. But if you start talking about 4 secondary pulls, you're just getting ridiculous. I don't think it's necessary. And like I said, if you're already cleaning and snatching, I don't know that you really need a row, other than, again, for just some extra bicep work. But like I said, you could do chins once we get that. You could throw in some cheek curls a couple times a week and get that also. So you don't necessarily need that compound movement if you're already proficient in cleans and snatches and you're doing them in addition to deadlifting. No, I don't think you need it. All right, next question and last question of the week. If I'm 25 to 30% body fat and go into a calorie deficit, would I still be able to train as hard, lose fat, and gain muscle if I'm only 3 months into serious strength training? Or should I maintain while I still have a good amount of noob gains to make and just do a cut after the holidays or next spring? All right, brother, I'm going to tell you straight up. You know, you'll notice me, I came over when I got above about the 25% body fat, I just started cutting. And I trimmed down already, and by the time I got to my DEXA scan, I was at 23%. Now I'm trying to get under 20, and I'm trying to gain strength as a strength athlete. I'm going to be honest with you here. If you're 25 to 30% body fat and you're not trying to become a world's strongest man competitor, an NFL lineman, or something to where your profession is going to sacrifice your health, because you accept that. If you go into something at a highly competitive level like that, that requires a high body weight, you know you're going to die young. You accept that you're going to die for it, right? That's accepted. But if you're not willing to die for what you are trying to do at a competitive level, you need to cut down at least to 20% body fat or less. You need to go ahead and cut. Now, will you gain as much muscle or strength cutting as you would not cutting? No. No. And people need to remember that. I mention all the time that if you're at a higher body fat, you've already bulked, and so you can still make gains while you cut slowly. That's true. That's absolutely true, particularly noob gains. But it is obviously not going to be the same gains you would make at maintenance or a surplus. It'll be slower gains while you're losing body fat. But if you still have any noob gains in the tank and you're above 25% body fat, you can still make half of your noob gains a month while bringing the scale down on a weekly basis. It's totally possible. It's totally doable. And I'm going to recommend in that case that you do that. I mean, there's lots of guys out there who are skinny noobs who I would say they can go ahead and bulk to 20%. That's fine. They need to put some size on their weak, scrawny ass. No doubt about it. And then they can cut later. But if you're starting above 25% or higher body fat, you can cut and make gains. It's not going to be your full noob gains, but you can make at least half of them a month, and you'll make pretty good progress. Go ahead and do that. You'll be healthier for it in the long term. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.